meant to orient us toward the most sacred part of the liturgy that's about to take place, the words of consecration. When the priest says, "This is my body, this is my blood," and the bread and wine will be changed into the very body and blood of Jesus Christ. It'll still look like bread and taste like bread and feel like bread and smell like bread. If you took the consecrated host to a laboratory and put it under a microscope, you're not going to notice any chemical change. It's going to have all the chemical properties of bread and wine. That's not what the Catholics believe. We don't believe it's a chemical change, but it's a real change, that underneath those outward appearances of bread and wine, Jesus' very body, blood, soul, and divinity are really present. That's why Jesus said, "This is my body, this is my blood," not a sign, not a symbol. The Eucharist isn't just a sign or a symbol of Jesus. It is really Jesus' presence. The same Jesus that walked the streets of Galilee, healing people, comforting people, challenging people, inviting them to follow him. That Jesus that worked miracles 2,000 years ago, that Jesus is in our midst sacramentally, under the appearance of bread and wine in the Eucharist. And so we've got to get ready. We have to prepare our minds and most of all, prepare our hearts, which is why the priest says this prayer in the liturgy: lift up your hearts. Now, I want to share with you one of those church fathers and his words and how he reflected on this prayer and what God is doing. And wow, when I read these words from Saint Cyril of Jerusalem, I was challenged. I was convicted. He said this. He says, "In this sublime moment," when the priest says the words, "lift up your hearts," in this sublime moment, the heart should be lifted up to God and not allowed to descend to the earth and to earthly concerns. With all possible emphasis, the priest exhorts us in this hour to lay aside all the cares of life, all domestic worries, and direct our hearts to God in heaven. I love this. So Cyril is telling us that when we hear the words, "lift up your heart," think of it as like a trumpet blast. The priest is challenging us, lift up your heart now. Give your heart to God. This is time not to think about your favorite football team. This is not the time to be thinking about your house project you're going to work on this afternoon, or what's for brunch, or what kind of donuts are they going to serve after Mass. No, this is the time to direct your heart to heaven, to think about these heavenly realities that are going to come down and be in our midst. The Blessed Sacrament, Christ is coming to walk among us. He's going to be with us in the Eucharist. And then here's the line that really challenged me here. Because I don't know about you, but my mind wanders a lot. I bet yours does as well. And I get so easily distracted, and that certainly that happens when you have little kids and all. But even when I'm able to go by myself, I can't blame my kids. It's my own restless mind, my own wandering mind, my restless heart. I could be all over the place during the liturgy. But when I hear these words, "lift up your hearts," it's a challenge. It's a challenge to me. Okay, now I got to really, really try my best and pay attention right now. Listen to what Cyril of Jerusalem says. Here's the line that really got me. He said, "Let there be none among you who shall confess with his lips, 'We have lifted up our hearts,' and allowed his thoughts to remain with the cares of this life." Wow. I just thought about how many times have I gone through the motions and said those words, "We have lifted them up to the Lord," like a robot. I just kind of go through the motions. I hear the words, "lift up your hearts," and I just kind of say, "Oh, we have lifted them up to the Lord." And I say I've lifted up my heart to the Lord, but my heart was not lifted up. I kept thinking about those donuts, or I kept thinking about that project I want to work on, or some problem at work, or whatever. I'm thinking about very earthly concerns. And I have to tell you, I've written this book on the Mass, and I've taught it so many times. And even me now, I still don't always get it right. But I will say that when I do hear these words, many more times, I'm more often than before, I'm attentive. I think of it as that trumpet blast. I think of it as inviting me to give God my best right now. And that's what God is inviting all of us to do here. So let's close by pondering, what might God be asking of us to lift up our hearts more? How might he be inviting us to lift up our hearts more to him in the Mass, but especially around this part here as we reach the words of consecration soon and we are getting to the heart of the liturgy of the Eucharist? How might God be inviting me to prepare for Mass better so that my heart isn't so restless and distracted? How is he inviting me to turn off the noise outside of me more? He's inviting me to maybe turn off my phone during Mass and not look at messages. And maybe he's inviting me to not just turn off the noise around me, but maybe how is God inviting me to turn off just the noise in my own head? And to remember what the Psalm reminds us of: be still and know that I am God. That's what God said in the Psalms. Be still and know that I am God. I can't really know God well. I can't really enter into his peace if I don't have that inner quiet. And so God is calling all of us to lift up our hearts. How might he be challenging you to do this in the liturgy? Take a moment to reflect on that right now.